Good morning everyone. Today we're going to be painting something a little bit new and snazzy. We're going to do a Soulblight Gravelords Vampire Lord. As you can see now, I've assembled her and I've base coated her with Army Painter matte white. Also added a couple of skulls from the skulls kit to the base for a little bit of variety. You'll notice I am keeping the bats in the hair. If you don't, you are a coward. I've said it. I'm going to start off with the face because that's going to be a little bit tricky to get to later. First thing I'm going to do is put a wash of Reikland Flesh Shade right over the white base coat because I'm going for like a pallid, pale skin colour. While the wash on the skin's drying, I'm going to go ahead and put Gravelords Brown over the whole base, including this rock she's standing on, and the skulls as well. I'm going to get some flayed one flesh and just give that face a little dry brush. Going to do a couple of tiny little highlights of white scar just in a couple of selected areas. So I'm just going to spot the nose, a little bit on the cheekbones and the brows, a little bit on the ear as well maybe. Yeah, that should do it. Don't want to go overboard with this. I'm going to a tiny little bit of Rhinox hide just on the inside of the mouth. I'm going to do just a tiny little bit of Nuln oil in the eye sockets. May wind up being a bit too much. If so, I'll just dab it away with the tip of my brush. Just using a clean brush to pick up the excess Nuln oil, leaving just a slight bit of shadow in the eye socket. After that, I've just gone back in with that white scar and picked out the eye and had a go at picking out the fangs, even though her gorget there's getting in the way. Smart thing to do would have been to do all that before assembling it, or at least before gluing the head on, but I'm not a very smart man. Going back to the base, over that base coat of Gravelords Brown, I'm going to put some Steel Legion Drab on the rock and some XV88 on those skulls. The rock we're just going to highlight with Xandri Dust here. And then the skulls, of course, going to be painted with Screaming Skull. Now we've painted all those base bits, we're going to use some Sterling mud today. Bit of a change from my usual preference, which is sand. Doesn't take as long to dry this does. Just going to glop it on with an old brush and then move it around. I don't have one of them spreading tool thingies. That's fine. I've got enough old shitty brushes that I can use. And make sure this is kind of hold up around the rocks and skulls, make them look a little bit buried in the earth. Cram a bit underneath there as well. Now the Sterling mud's dried, going to dry brush the top of the base with a little bit more Mornfang Brown. Try and avoid getting it on the skulls and the rock. If a little bit gets on there, it's not a big deal. After neatening up the skulls with a little bit of Screaming Skull, we're going back to old reliable Agrax Earthshade and just covering everything on top of the base. With that, and some Abaddon Black to tidy up the base rim. The base is pretty much complete. Might add a few grass tufts. I'm going to try something a little different with the vampire's hair, and after I've neatened it up with white, just to remove any of the flesh tone, I'm going to give it a wash of Nihilakh Oxide. I wouldn't recommend washing your hair with Nihilakh Oxide in real life because that'll get very expensive, probably very messy. I don't think anybody will be happy with that. I'm not going to paint the bats, but also I'm not going to worry if I get a little bit on them. Tidy them up later. The Vampire Lord on the cover of the Battle Tome has this sort of ghostly pale hair, so that's what I'm intending to go for here. I'll paint it in sort of typical, ethereal Nighthaunt colours and see how that looks with some dark armour. I think that could really pop. Now I'm just going to give the hair a dry brush of white scar. Hopefully that will finish that off nicely and give it that sort of pale, almost ethereal look that I wanted to go for. I'm going to give the bats in the hair a coat of wildwood. Just going to do that very carefully so that I don't get any brown on this nice ethereal colour that I've managed to get already. And then once that's dry, I'm going to put Black Templar just on the bat's wings. So they've got black wings and brown furry bodies. And again, being very careful not to get any of this on the hair, because otherwise that'll be a pain to fix. There we go. And with just a couple of contrast paints, I think I'm going to call those bats done. Or at the very least, good enough. So for the red armour, I'm going to have a go at copying a recipe I saw on Twitter by somebody called Alexi Painter. I'll try and put a link to that in the description if I remember. But the base coat of this, they said, is 50-50 mix of Corn Red and Mephiston Red. So I'm just going to start with that. Just get that all over the armour. And I'm going to switch to a smaller brush for doing the collar, because I really don't want to get any of this over what we've already done on the face. The next stage now is to apply a shade of Baraknar Burgundy. So what I've done is I've just thinned this down a whole lot so it can act like a wash, and then I'll just apply that, you know, all over with a wash brush as I would normally. Maybe give it another go if it's coming out too thin or patchy. I'll see how it looks after this first coat dries. Now that's dried, and yeah, it's given a nice slight little burgundy tint to the armour. Going to go ahead and do Nuln Oil just as a recess shade. So I'm only going to use a little brush for this. Just get it in all the recessed parts. Thankfully, it's got a lot of nice ridges and things in the armour that we can tuck a bit of recess shade underneath. And try not to be too messy. We can clean this up a little during the highlight stages next. Alright, so here's where I'd possibly ruin this thing forever. According to the recipe, there's 4 layers of edge highlights, starting with Wazdaka Red here. So I guess I'll start with fairly heavy highlights with this and then get narrower. And then there's a layer of thin down contrast over the top of everything once you're done. So hopefully that will pull it back if some of these highlights are a bit too strong. I don't know. Goes all the way up to, I think Kislev Flesh and Flayed One Flesh. So those are going to be quite sharp. We'll see. We'll see how we go. First off, we're just going to go over the Wazdaka Red and apply some fairly thick edge highlights, so we've got somewhere to go from there. There's how she looks with the Wazdaka Red highlights on. Don't know how well it's showing up, but I have gone for fairly thick highlights because, as I said, there's going to be 3 more highlights after this, so I want to leave myself room. But I'm actually pretty happy with how that red's looking already. Hopefully I don't screw it up too much in the later stages. Alright, next we're going to move on to the Wild Rider Red and try and do about the same. Just a slightly thinner edge highlight. Leave some of the Wazdaka Red showing. And there she is with the Wild Rider Red highlights done. I'm still really liking how this is looking so far. The highlights they're pretty bright and they're going to get brighter, but hopefully that contrast at the end will knock it all down and make it look beautiful. Moving on now to the Kislev Flesh highlights. This is where things might start to look a little bit odd. I've switched to a thinner brush for this, and I'm going to be trying to limit my edge highlights to just the tips of these pointy bits. Maybe that's a little too much. We'll see. Okay, final highlight time. A little bit of Flayed One Flesh. Just going to dot that right onto the points of things. I'm excited to slap a wash of contrast all over this. I'm not going to lie. It's just a light touch with this one. Okay, final stage on the red armour. We're going to go for a 50-50 mix of Contrast Medium and Flesh Tearers Red, which I'm going to have to be very careful not to get on the base that I've just done, and especially on the face. This is looking like a nice rich red colour already. I'm switching to a smaller brush to the armour that's next to the face and the hair because I'm very nervous about it. I really should have painted the head separately and then attached it when I was done, but hey, you live and you learn. The field of the shield is going to be black, so I'm going to start by having just 1 coat of Black Templar with a fine brush just to go over this, and be careful to avoid the dragon design on the shield. Just going to carefully go around the dragon design. Now that Black Templar's started to even that out and gotten into the recesses at the edge of the area that I want to be black, I'm going to come back in with the Abaddon Black and just make that colour a bit more solid. Sharp edge of that shield, I'm just going to highlight with a bit of Dark Reaper. Then once that's dry, I'm going to highlight that once again just on the very edges and points with Fenrisian Grey. Right, so the last thing to do now is to start in on the metallics. So that's the trim on the edge of the shield and her big old mace thing. I'm going to start by base coating those with Balthazar Gold. I've done like a nice bronze goldy thing on Sanguinius a little bit earlier. I posted on Twitter, and I'm basically going to copy that because I like how it turned out. Alright, next stage on the metal is just to darken it down with a bit of Agrax Earthshade. You might notice I added a couple of grass tufts on the base since it was looking a bit plain and empty, and there's already 2 skulls and a rock on there, so I didn't really want to just add more skulls. So yeah, that's just a couple of regular dead grass tufts from my local hobby store that have PVA'd on there. Now I'm going to use Brass Scorpion to highlight these metallic areas, and there will be a second highlight after this. And for the final highlight on the metal, I'm going to use Rune Lord Brass. Just get that on the little points and edges of the mace here, and just a few sharp edges on the shield there as well. And then that should be it. There we go. Once she's been given a coat of varnish and is ready for the tabletop, the vampire is complete. I say tabletop, I'm going to have to be very careful taking her anywhere because of all the hair bat situation going on there. But as I said, I wanted to keep it on because it's daft. I like it. It's cool. Yeah, so I intended this to just be a quick project. I started it on the weekend it was released, picked her up, thought, yeah, do a quick painting video, get that out. Didn't really work out. Takes me a little while to do these videos, as you may be able to tell with me releasing this, like a couple of months after. Anyway, about the model, very nice. I like the earlier clan pack characters they did, like the White King and the Necromancer, which are also going to be in the same army as this. So this is a nice character in the spirit of those. A little single frame plastic character. Very nice. I might pick up the Crimson Court as well, because I just love all of the new vampire stuff they've made, and I want all of it. But mostly, I want to get Nagash out on the table again, and have a nice looking modern army to do with him, and so this is the first step with that. That's all for today. If you've got any thoughts or comments, or things that you want me to do in future videos, do let me know. If you're perfectly satisfied with it, you can let me know about that as well, that's fine. Anyway, take care, and I will see you in the next one.